Good morning, everyone. My name is Elwin, and I welcome everyone online and offline on behalf of Jubilee Campaign. I just wanted to let everyone know that this event is being recorded. The title for this side event is Combat Slavery, STEM Kidnapping, Trafficking, Forced Marriages, and Religious Conversions of Women and Girls. The co-sponsors of this side event are Coptic Solidarity, Christian Freedom International, Voice of Justice, and Set My People Free. Please feel free to raise questions or put in the chat. Our moderator today is Arielle del Turco. She serves as a director of Center of Religious Freedom in Family Research Center, and she's responsible for religious freedom policy and advocacy efforts. Now, Arielle, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We are going to be addressing a very grave, very widespread issue, and that is the kidnapping, trafficking, and forced marriage and conversion of women and girls, particularly from religious minority communities. The latest global estimates.
Your voice.
Yes, sir, I can. The latest global estimates of modern slavery report found in 2021 that nearly 50 million people were living in contemporary forms of slavery, with 22 million of them being trapped in forced marriage. More than 2/3 of those who are forced to marry are female. 2 in 5 of those forced to marry were children when the marriage took place, and 41% of these children were forced to marry before they even turned 16 years old.
Frozen image.
Forced marriages take place in every region of the world, with the largest number of violations taking place in Asia and the Pacific, which account for 2/3 of all forced marriages. This is followed by Africa and Europe and Central Asia. With regard to regions with the highest prevalence of forced marriage, Arab states and Asia and the Pacific were overrepresented. The Special Rapporteur on combating forms of slavery has reported on violations of non-state actors in northern Nigeria, where Boko Haram primarily targets Christians and moderate Muslims for kidnapping and enslavement. The Special Rapporteur has also raised grave concern in a specific communication to the government of Pakistan for the reports of abduction of and trafficking in women and children, forced and early marriage, violence including rape and sexual violence against women and girls, persecution of religious minorities, and disregard for the right to freedom of religion and belief of victims. So I'm going to introduce our panelists one at a time before allowing them to give their opening remarks. And to start us off, we are honored to have the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery with us today, Professor Tomoya Obokata. Professor Obokata has been the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery, including its causes and consequences, since March 2020. He is a scholar of international law and human rights, specializing in transnational organized crime, human trafficking, and modern slavery. Professor Obokata currently serves as Professor of International Law and Human Rights at Kiel University. His most recent thematic report for the UN addresses the use of technology in facilitating and preventing contemporary forms of slavery. So we're very thankful to have you here, and I'll let you take it away.
Sure. Can we start? Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me this morning to talk about this is very important issue, which is relevant to my mandate. I take a position certainly that child and forced marriage constitute a clear violation of fundamental human rights norms and principles, and just has been highlighted by you yourself. And as it is it happens in different parts of the world, and she mentioned Asia and Africa, but it is also important to remember that child marriage can also happen in a developed world, including Europe, North America, and so on. So this is a widespread issue that we need to consider quite seriously. And so I just wanted to touch upon some of perhaps the causes why people, girls and women are drawn into this. And there are key causes such as poverty, which oftentimes force parents to encourage their girls to marry into a wealthier household. Gender inequality and intersectional forms of discrimination based on various grounds. Religion is one, nationality, migration status, indigenous status, sexual orientation, and so on. And they also put in particular these populations in a marginalized position, and social and cultural acceptance of child and forced marriage also can be seen in various parts of the world. And that's the reason why as many as 22 million people are in this situation. And other causes also include lack of access to education, particularly for girls, which is such a concerning problem, not just in the context of Asia, but in different parts of the world. And also the ineffective enforcement of laws and regulation. A large number of countries nowadays do have legislation prohibiting forced or child marriage. The fact that these practices exist suggests or demonstrates that the laws are not enforced. And so I think that needs to be addressed. And there are also issues such as, for example, humanitarian crisis, conflicts, natural disasters, displacements, and most recently the COVID-19 pandemic. There's an emerging evidence that these are forcing instances of resulted in the growth of child and forced marriage. So this is not a simple issue. There's lots of interconnecting causes at play. And what happens then after they are forced? Obviously, child and forced marriage in themselves are violations of human rights, but there are other consequences. For example, it is linked to other forms of exploitation, such as sexual exploitation or slavery and domestic servitude, where girls are forced to work for a household as maid, cleaning and cooking and taking care of the elderly and so on. And forced religious conversion is an important issue, and as the distinguished panelists will probably be highlighting these issues further in Africa, Asia, and Pakistan. Domestic violence, forced pregnancy, violation of right to work and education, and even the right to life has been taken as so-called dowries death, when killing some individuals are killed when dowries are not high enough. And so these are the consequences of child and forced marriage. And what I do in my capacity as Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery, I'm entrusted to examine issues relating to traditional slavery, forced labor, including child and forced marriage. So I publish an annual report, and I oftentimes touch upon a child and forced marriage. So for example, last year, when I published a report on the exploitation of minorities, I looked at that dimension in certain societies and cultures, and religious, linguistic, and ethnic minorities are forced into these practices, which is quite disturbing. So I try to shed a light on these issues by producing an annual thematic report, and also conduct country visits. Once again, every time I go, I examine the issue of child and forced marriage and obtain first-hand information from the victims as well as civil society organizations and so on. And so the key here is a fact-finding. My job is to kind of find facts and widely share that within the international community for others to learn. And another things that I do is send communications. So when I receive allegations of contemporary forms of slavery, including child and forced marriage, I am in a position to be able to send the allegation to the government themselves. So in 2021, myself and other special rapporteurs sent a communication to Pakistan on the issue of forced conversion and forced marriage of young girls and women, vis-a-vis to encouraging the government to respond to these allegations and highlighting the steps taken. And some countries do respond, but I don't remember if Pakistan has actually responded to our allegations, which is slightly concerning. But this is to enhance dialogue and cooperation from the alleged countries. And so these are some of the ways that I try to bring these issues to the attention of individual countries concerned, as well as the international community. And then I also work with relevant victims and survivors themselves, and also civil society organizations, faith-based groups, with a view to raising awareness and also promote international standards on these issues. So these are some of the things I do. So I'll stop there, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate your work so very much, and just your passion for these issues, which is so evident. We're going to turn now to talk about some specific countries and the situations in each of these countries. And the first one we're going to turn to is Egypt, which is home to the indigenous Coptic Christian population. And sometimes information is a bit difficult to disseminate and assess from that region. So we're very happy to have Carolyn Doss with us today. She is an attorney as well as the president of Coptic Solidarity, a nonprofit organization focused on assisting minorities in Egypt. They also support those in Egypt working on freedom, democracy, and the protection of fundamental rights of all Egyptians. Ms. Doss has testified before the U.S. Congress on the issue facing Coptic Christians in Egypt, and we're looking forward to hearing from her today. So take it away.
Thank you, everyone. Just as a background, my 9 to 5 is basically working with asylees from Egypt. So I'd say in the last decade, I've probably spoken with over 1,000. So I definitely have a good gauge of what's happening on the ground there and what the concerns are of the people that are choosing to flee Egypt, and the reasons why they're choosing to flee Egypt. Today's topic is the kidnapping and forced conversion of Christian women in Egypt, as well as minors. In the last decade, we report that there's over 500 Christian women or girls that have disappeared, kidnapped, and forced to convert to Islam. Now, these are very rough numbers. They're probably much, much more than that. And this doesn't, of course, include attempted kidnappings, which you can't even put a number on that. You can't even put a number on that. The issue is widespread. I've noticed that it happens in all parts of the country, from Cairo to Alexandria, to the foreign areas. It's everywhere. If you look to social media, you'll see cases popping up this year, unfortunately. Every other week or every week, sometimes you'll see a family pleading to get their daughter back. Facebook is one of the main mechanisms that that people from Egypt tend to use because they don't get any help from the police. So they figure, all right, let me put my plea out there and see if the pressure from the public will help me bring my daughter back. And it has worked. And it has worked in certain cases. They put the picture out there. What happened in quick summary, and please help us. Obviously, these people, the first thing they do is go to the police. Although they're not helpful, but it's the first thing a person would do instinctually speaking. That's where they tend to go. In some cases, police refuse to issue a report. And in rare cases where they do issue a report, they won't even give the family the report number. Fast forward, in some cases, girls are actually returned after much public pressure. They just suddenly reappear, which leads you to logically conclude that security officials knew where these girls were all the time. Girls reappear. The security officials know who the offenders are, but at the end, you see 0 prosecutions, 0 arrests. So I challenge anyone to find 1 arrest and 1 prosecution for one of these cases in the last decade. Although it's something we hear about consistently, it's in the media. Coptic communities are constantly asking for help. Church leaders, there was one bishop that was interviewed recently in one of the articles we had posted on our website, saying that in his area alone, 15 girls had disappeared. No prosecutions, no arrests. So these kidnappings happen in many different forms. So you have the women that disappear right off the street on their way to school, on their way to church, on their way to work. And then you have the other category that's deceived, fraud, lured by their kidnappers. And in either case, it's the same. The Coptic woman is kept captive. Occasionally, you get a video online of the woman under duress, clearly stating that she had converted to Islam. The government quickly issues within days a ID card and a conversion certificate, which means obviously they're complicit and they're also working along with the kidnappers and providing that support. So it's a network. It's not just the kidnappers that are at fault, but it's the police that refuses to take a report. It's the security officials that know where she is and fail to do anything about it after the girl reappears. And then it's the others who are participating, issuing the IDs, the conversion certificates within the religious community and the government offices. So unfortunately, even though the problem has permeated into all these different areas, we still haven't been able to find a solution. Government refuses to acknowledge that there's a problem. Refuses to acknowledge. First thing you have to do is acknowledge. After you acknowledge it, you begin to address. So they need to acknowledge so that we can begin to put programs or mechanisms in place to protect this minority. These are the indigenous people of Egypt. These are the indigenous people of Egypt. And these are tactics that the majority and Islamists use to try and reduce their numbers and wipe them out and weaken them even further. And the government, complicit in what they're doing, weakens the minority even more, making them feel hopeless and helpless in this kind of environment. Also, programs, I think, are very important. We don't have any programs for these women that are retrieved or for their families. Lots of times, these families need to flee where they were, where the crime took place, because they can't remain there for a variety of reasons. Threats, fear of harm to the other daughters or the other female members, because there were no repercussions or prosecutions in relation to the crimes that occurred. So, I'm happy that we're here today because one of the first things we need to do is educate the public on what's happening in Egypt, educate people on the plight of Christians in Egypt. And the second thing is we need to start putting pressure on Egypt. Our government, with their counterparts in Egypt, do what they can to put pressure, bring attention to the matter in front of the UN. I'm very grateful that the UN Rapporteur is here today because I'm sure, we'll be talking in the future and finding ways to perhaps communicate that message to the Egyptian government. Hey, it's pretty strange that we don't even have one arrest, one prosecution for all these kidnappings and these forced conversions. There needs to be a change, and I'm glad that we're here to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So we're actually going to transition now to one of our online panelists. So we have Joseph Janssen with us. He is a human rights activist, founder of Voice for Justice, and he also works with Jubilee Campaign. He is a human rights activist currently leading critical court cases in Pakistan and other countries, in addition to compiling reports regarding religious freedom. Recently, he has been urging the government of Pakistan to adopt a law to criminalize coerced religious conversion and amend the Child Marriage Restraint Act to ensure that the minimum marriageable age is set at 18 years for both boys and girls. Voice for Justice has also worked to secure court decisions to allow abducted girls to be returned to their families. So Joseph, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jubilee Campaign, for the opportunity to address a pressing issue that demands our attention and action: forced conversion of Christian and Hindu girls and women in Pakistan. Voice for Justice, in collaboration with Jubilee Campaign, has examined this issue and findings a report titled "Conversion Without Consent" shed light on a matter that calls for immediate action. The report reveals that a total of 100 cases revealed related to abduction, forced conversion, and forced marriages of Christian girls were reported across the country between January 2019 and October 2022. 61% from that were targeted from reaching the age of 16 years, while 18% of the girls became victim between the ages of 16 and 18 years, whereas 14% victims were above the 18 years of age. The ages of 7% of the victims were not ascertained. The highest number of the cases was reported in Punjab. And we are talking about Christian girls, only Christian girls. The report is reported for 100. Generally, there is estimated by the rights group, like in the same, there are thousands of girls annually have been abducted and forced to convert to Islam from only one province, Sindh, and the majority girls belongs to from Hindu community there. And this report particularly based for Christian community. It is quite often that the abductor is twice or more the age of his new so-called wife. The abductor presents the case as a Christian girl being converted to Islam, which is praised widely by the, of course, supported society. Police, judges, and other key actors turn a blind eye and celebrate this victory of Islam and ignore all evidence, signs that girls might being forced or kidnapped or abducted by the abductors. Commonly used tactics by the police and judges, lawyers, and others to decline registration FIR. The poor family go to the police station, they decline to complaint against the abductor, and also they make it like this is a love affairs, and also they support to perpetrators and completely declined other sections, relevant sections, which are supposed to mention in the complaint, like she's abducted or forcefully converted to Islam. Evidence that submit which shows that the girl are underage or forced or often ignored, are often ignored by the judges and police and others, and they accept fabricated evidence from the Islamic abductors. This is what happened in Pakistan. The story of Christian girl, Zervia Pervez, a 13-year-old school-going who was abducted on 30th April 2022, forcefully converted and married off to Imran. Imran was already married and had several children older than Zervia and was around the age of 40 years old. Zervia's parents presented her crucial evidence like birth certificate, school certificates, and other relevant documents, which is saying that Zervia is 13-year-old. Unfortunately, lower courts, high courts, and other all relevant institutes, state institutes, ignored this crucial evidence provided by the parents, like she is a minor, was even allowed to marry with her abducted, and her recovery petition or the petition, criminal petition to bring those perpetrators or abductors to justice was rejected by the lower court and by the high court in Rawalpindi. What we often see that the abductor files a counter complaint saying that the parents of the girl are harassing him and trying to kidnap their daughters out of the illegal custody of abductor, rather than the parents, the fight to bring that daughter back. They have to defend themselves with these false and counter applications, complaints, which are registered by the abductors. And this normally happened because the abductor used bribery, give money to the police officers, and they registered the complaint against the abductors, against the parents, and they have to face these. They have to face, the police these charges and defend themselves from the arrest of police. Recently, we have the case from Faisalabad, where the Christian girl was abducted during the Jadawala attack, and the abductor complained against the parents, and we have received bail of 6 family members of the abductor girl. Rather than we should fighting to bring that girl back to her parents, we were defending even the parents. So these kind of tactics police is continuously using, and the courts are facilitating. When Zervia was rescued by the help of human rights activists, she shared how she was heavily drugged, raped, sodomized, burned with cigarette, beaten with sticks and harmed, electric shocks, and tortured in numerous ways. All these evidence, even on her own body, she was at the court showing how she was, tortured. Police, relevant all state actors, institutes who were supposed to give her justice, ignore all these evidence and statements delivered by the victim inside the court in front of the judges. So her case was dismissed. Therefore, these practices are seriously threat for religious minorities, and religious minorities, particularly Christians and Hindus, are facing serious threat of Sharia laws in Pakistan, which is implemented on minorities like Christian and Hindus, and ordinary laws and laws are ignored and denied when it comes to minority cases, particularly in Punjab and Sindh, of course, across Pakistan. I urge the government of Pakistan to introduce legislation amend, at least criminalize forced conversion, introduce a pass amendment to the Child Marriage Restraint Act to ensure that the minimum marriage age is set 18 years for both. In Punjab, right now, there is a law that the girls should be 16 and boys should be 18. So there's a gender-based discrimination between the Pakistan's own laws, which is carried now for marriages. So that should be amended, reformed, and also ensure that the faith conversion are regulated and testified by a special court, and statements of the girls are recorded not in the presence of her abductor, who is so-called her husband. We need your support that Pakistan must take these issues seriously and respond the communication which sent by the several special rapporteurs this year and last year, and implement international convention, particularly child marriage and sexuality and other 24 conventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. Well, we are going to turn now to another panelist in the room. We are honored to have Mariam Oyiza with us today. Mariam is a human rights defender from Nigeria, and she is the founder of Learning Through Skills Acquisition Initiative. We're looking forward to hearing from your perspective, so over to you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, and also people that are online. My name is Mariam Oyiza. I'm a human rights defender. Before I present to you my not so boring speech, permit me to share with you a very sounding story about a girl child. At the age of 12, she was sent to live with her stepmother. I usually call this story a true Cinderella story. So the stepmother was considered to be rich enough to sponsor children to school, but she was to do labor in exchange. In a house with over 6 children, she was treated with disgust and unfairness because of the way she came into the house. She was not related by blood. She would have to do more than others just to get a plate of food. She was beaten when she ate and starved for that day. She tolerated the abuse because she was hopeful she was going to go to school. After a few years of no school, just chores and beating and humiliation, she decided to reach out to them to beg, to cry, please, I want to go to school, help me, register me in the school, that is why I'm here. But they never agreed. Instead, they sent all her brothers to school, or half brothers, and she never got the opportunity. So she decided to follow her brother, one of her brothers, secretly whenever she was sent out on a chore. And she would watch them, receiving lectures in class through the peephole on the window. So her determination at such a young age drove her to search for small jobs that she could earn a little bit of money from at the age of 13, 14, thereabout. And with the little money she was able to get, she was able to register herself into a school. She survived because at that particular time, seeing that she was so disobedient, she was surviving on palm kernels and gari. Gari is a traditional Nigerian food, which is regarded as a poor man's food. So, and also they were trying to marry her off to an older person because she was actually of the age at that time. So, a few years after, she became a librarian. That specific woman is the reason why I am standing in front of you today. She was my mother. Her ripple effect is what has helped me to be able to reach out to so many women in the northern part of Nigeria. Just one girl child, just one action of one girl child. She has tried as much as she can to ensure that all her children are well schooled. I remember sometimes she would tell me something like, I would rather starve to ensure that you go to school. And I am so glad that as a medical radiographer, I'm standing right here today, and I'm able to stretch forth my hand to support so many young women and children in the northern part of Nigeria. The National Legal Protective Framework is the Child Rights Act, which is 2003, Child Rights Act of 2003 in Nigeria. So then we still have states like Kano, Zamfara, and Jigawa State in Nigeria who has refused its domestication. is still the same state that has the highest number of child marriage, forced marriage, and morality police called Hisba, who threaten women and girls with a voice. The implementation of this specific Child Right Act is still very patchy, even for those states who have domesticated, who have accepted to it. And many of the local authorities are actually unaware of the duties under this specific law because they don't even know, they don't have the knowledge of what it is and what they are supposed to do under that. 43% of girls are married up before the age of 18 and 16% before the age of 15. And this is a very common practice in actually northeastern part of Nigeria as well as northwestern part of Nigeria, where 68% and 57% of women aged between 20 to 49 are married up before their 18th birthday. And also a very high amount of this is in Borno State, where the IDPs and the Boko Haram issues are currently. So we are going to talk about the drivers of these specific issues, which according to the Special Rapporteur, he has made a very good statement about naming religion and violence and inequalities. I will also talk about political and economic ties as well. And also, because in the North, we have different sets of terrorism currently in the northern part of Nigeria. We have the banditry, which is plaguing the Northwest, and then we have the Boko Haram, and the ISIS and ISIL, which is in the Northwest. So the banditry, more of what they do specifically is kidnap young girls. There are some communities like Jigawa State in the northwestern part of Nigeria where most of the community have to pay some sort of taxes or they have to give money for them to actually be safe, their children within those specific community, because if they don't do that, then their girls get forced out of the home. Sometimes they are killed right in front of their parents. We're going to look at some commitments that Nigeria have with the international treaty, which was not nationalized or domesticated. The CEDAW Treaty, which was ratified in 1985 by Nigeria, was never assented to by the Senate till today. I remember that in 2017, the CEDAW Committee expressed concern about the prevalence of child marriage in Nigeria, and they gave recommendations. But this law has not been domesticated yet, and no matter the recommendation, there's a section in our constitution that kicks against the domestication of this act. And that's the section 12 that says that no treaty so far it has not been signed into law by the Senate will ever be law in Nigeria. So it is very easy for our legislators to bring out a pen and ratify, but then it is definitely not practiced. Are we supposed to trust a lawmaker who married his wife when she was 13 to make laws that protect women and girls? I do not think so. The legislative arm has been consistent in ensuring that progressive laws like Gender Equality Bill, which was refused 3 times, are not passed into law for flimsy reasons like religion, culture, and misogyny, because they themselves benefit from the patriarchal status quo. According to the 2020 Nigerian Trafficking in Persons report, out of 521 sex trafficking victims, 158 were children, all girls, and the rest were women. You see, sometimes we have the Civilian Joint Task Force in northern part of Nigeria that was conferred with the right to protect people within the IDP camps. Most times you find out that they are actually the ones that are trafficking these people out. There are a lot of research that has pointed out that fact. So what do we do to protect these girls? The United Nations can support women-led organizations to continue to advance women's rights through firm and consistent legislative redress, like a push to make the CEDAW a national law. Poverty alleviation programs that empower households to be self-sufficient, which is supposed to be a duty of the Nigerian government, but I believe there's also a push in the international community to support some specific area. I believe it will work. Protection of human rights defenders who are on ground actively supporting cases like this, with necessary resources and international protection, of course, so they can continue to do their job. Consistent dialogues with religious leaders, that is the local community leaders who have much more impact in terms of supporting these laws, who absolutely don't have an idea of most of these laws. So giving them some sort of training and enhancement is also going to support the emancipation of women's rights, girls' rights as well. We have grassroots championing for sustainable development, comprehensive training of local lawmakers, and that is what I have to say. But in conclusion, let's champion the future of our girls, advocating for their rights together, let's forge a world where every girl can thrive and realize her full potential of becoming either a doctor or a librarian, just like my mom. I express my profound gratitude for your unwavering attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariam. I appreciate that so much. We are going to go back online now to our next panelist, Marcela Szymanski. She is the EU and UN Advocacy Officer for the Pontifical Foundation Aid to the Church in Need. She has over 20 years experience as media correspondent and public affairs professional, elevating the voice of the persecuted. Marcela is also a member of the Council of Experts of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance. She has closely monitored the situation of religious minority women and girls. Marcela, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here with you today. I'm very, very glad for the presence also of the special rapporteur and all these magnificent testimonies. Aid to the Church in Need is a foundation just to help the church on material needs, but it's unavoidable to hear from all the project partners, which are in 150 countries, to hear also the problems that they have when they ask, for example, for help to set up a psychological trauma center. And then we learned that this is mostly for women and girls that have been horrifyingly abused or taken as slaves and then found back, like our colleague from Coptic Solidarity was explaining, that all of a sudden they appear and they are in total shambles. So our project partners ask for funding to help provide this aid, and we are glad to be able to be of some remedy to this terrible pain. I am the editor-in-chief of the Religious Freedom Report of Aid to the Church in Need. Some of you might have seen it. I don't know. Now, of course, it's all blurry. I'll send you. But anyway, this report is published every 2 years. I have been the editor-in-chief for 4 editions, and I have seen the coincidence, of course, of the problem that we are discussing today with the progress of 2 things, 2 elements, which are the proliferation of authoritarian governments, where the governments are persecuting their own citizens or simply not prosecuting their aggravators. Also, like we have heard in the previous testimonies, that there's no prosecution, that there's no punishment, nothing, because why? Why on earth? Is it because we are women? Is it because they are from a minority religion? But most of the cases, we have heard, and we are going to hear certainly from others, that Muslim women, Hindu women in India, Buddhist women in Myanmar, they are taken much easier as an easier prey by the traffickers that children have another identity or religion. Countries of where we try to help the called Talita Kum include Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, Mozambique, and all the Levant. In China, regretfully, I just heard a few days.
Marcela, I think we're having connection issues. Oh, she might be back.
They cannot have children anymore. They just sent them back to Myanmar. You can imagine in what mental state after they have been used like the slaves in the 19th century just to produce more organs. But
oh, Marcela,
referring to yes.
Oh, you're back now. Sorry, we were having connection issues. If she can repeat what she was saying. Do you mind repeating what you were just saying?
To say in my brief minutes here with you is how can we look at the future? Because I have my report, I do it in 196 countries, all the religions present. Because the aggravating factors are, of course, the protracted conflicts that we are seeing in each continent, the proliferation of impunity nationally and internationally. Now, we just heard from Joseph how terrible is impunity out in this particular forum that there is a problem also with the West. Why? Because there is an unwillingness to take other countries to task because of the desperate
Thank you, Marcela.
countries, which when you, again, I broke up.
Yes, we're still
Well,
having some connection issues. Could you
I'm
maybe wrap
sorry.
it up with your final word in a few seconds here? Or turn off your camera. Or maybe turning off your camera would help with the audio. I think you keep freezing.
Countries on not on accepting what they call underage marriage as something normal. If the girl was married in Pakistan and returns to Belgium, Belgium doesn't say anything. If she is a Belgian girl, went to Pakistan.
Thank you, Marcela. I think we might have to move on to our next panelist just because of some connection issues. But I do really appreciate all the work that you and Aid to the Church in Need does. We are going to move on to our next remote panelist, Sonja Dahlmans. She is a journalist who has done extensive research on the abduction and forced marriage of underage girls. Over the last 8 years, she is currently writing her master's thesis, focusing on Islam and child marriage. So Sonja, we're eager to hear from you.
Yes, good morning to most of you. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm working, as you said, as a journalist, basically covering the stories that our other panelists have just been sharing with us. So I'm focusing on abduction, forced marriage, and forced conversions. And both my master thesis in Islam and also in Christianity and Christian theology cover this. You've asked me, your General Assembly asked me to say something about why media are so reluctant to report on what we are discussing today. And just to illustrate that, we've just heard Marcela from Aid to the Church in Need, and they have written a report, I believe it was 2022, 2021, I'm not sure, called Hear Her Cries, which was exactly on the subject we are discussing today. And according to them, the UK department, Facebook censored their report. So coverage of these stories is really important. And I've recognized 4 issues that we're dealing with in Western media. One of them is that for example, Coptic Solidarity International and also Mr. Joseph Janssen has already said, when it concerns forced abduction, marriage, conversions, we are dealing with people from marginalized, discriminated groups, religious minority groups. And often Western media, people in the West, demand that these people give them statistics, numbers, before a problem is recognized as a problem. We need Western focus, the Western way of dealing with things, which is analyzing numbers. Because these are not marginalized groups, giving statistics, Coptic Solidarity International just highlighted that, indeed is really difficult, but that doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. I think this is Western bias that we really need to address. One cannot expect marginalized, discriminated people to hand over the way that numbers, statistics of reports, the way we do that in the West. And one of them is also because authorities in these countries, in these regions, very often do not take parents seriously, do not sometimes even accept parents wanting to report a missing child. Research, as is where a child has gone, has been taken, isn't followed. all of that is a real big issue. And I think the media in the West, politicians in the West, for that matter, need to understand the dire situation these people are in. And unfortunately, in many countries in the West, this discrimination, that the fact that things don't work the same in other countries as they work here, where there is equality before the law, I think is one of the things that many people don't see. This brings us to the second problem that I see, and that is that media often believe what authoritative regimes tell them without any disclaimer. For example, that there's no problem with discrimination towards religious minorities, that there is no discrimination in law, and also, as Coptic Solidarity representative also highlighted, that in the media these girls sometimes are seen stating that they converted freely out of their own free will to Islam. These things also are very problematic, and I think that that is something that that we need to in Western media need to understand how things work in other countries. The third problem that I analyze, and that's a very important one, I think, is that we, even today in our modern world, in our contemporary time, we view sexual violence, for example, in conflict, as a problem not in its own right, but as a side effect of, for example, armed conflict or war, as we've seen, for example, with what happened to the Yazidi community in Iraq and Syria under ISIS. The rape and abduction, forced conversions of these girls, they are mentioned in the media, but almost only exclusively as side effect of the violence, to highlight or to stress, well, if you like, the barbarism of the abductors. This is problematic because for my research, I'm covering this, and that is that very often the abduction, as we've seen with ISIS, Yazidis, also Christian women, by the way, is covered. But what happens after the abduction, so the forced conversions, the sexual abuse, the sex slavery that we have seen, that we've heard from witnesses, is less covered. And in my thesis, I write about a mechanism which is by an American scholar. She wrote about the Roman time when Christianity was developing in the Middle East. And she said a spectacle needs spectators, and this is the issue. So when Boko Haram, for example, takes 300 schoolgirls into the jungle where nobody sees them, we lose their stories, their dire situation. We lose that out of our sight. And that is a huge issue. So therefore, we hardly see, not literally witness it, but I mean also having it in our thoughts, in our policies. We hardly see what is happening because it is happening away from the public eye. I think that's a very crucial point. Also, there's no follow-up. Even when girls are freed, as we've seen with Yazidis, there's hardly any media coverage of that. But there are very hard and very real issues, girls returning. One of them, for example, being children having no identity. Children, born out of rape. Another issue is women not being welcomed into their own society again because they were married to their abductor, because there were children from these rapes. This is not to blame the Yazidi community because they are dealing with this, but I'm just stating how traumatic and how far going, also in the long term, these problems with abduction, forced conversions and abuse, how long this can take, the effect of it. And then another thing with that is that there is a word called soft genocide. And when we, as Dr. Stephanie Kopp said in her book about martyrdom, when we are interested in martyrdom, in persecution, we are mostly interested in, as she calls it, the gut and gore, so the very gruesome details. But as Mr. Luis Moreno Ocampo also said a few weeks ago, starvation, not giving access to food convoys, for example, as we've seen recently in Artsakh, or called Nagorno-Karabakh, is also a way of ethnic cleansing a people. This also, in my opinion, goes for the abuse of women, specifically of minority groups, which is, I think, stays under the radar. And with the Yazidis, for example, this has been well acknowledged that this can be a form of genocide, abducting people from minority groups, forcing them to convert, specifically women from fertile ages, so birth-giving ages, in the long term, in the long run, will cause these groups to become even smaller than they already are. So in my opinion, this is a form of genocide. And I don't use the term soft to marginalize what is happening, but I mean, it is not the violent way that we usually think of when we think of genocide. And my last issue is that girls often use their identity. And in our modern time of news bringing, identification, human interest is a very, very big part of news. And when we call, for example, in Nigeria, girls the Chibok girls, they have lost their identity. They're no longer Esther, they're no longer Naomi. They are Chibok girls or Yazidis. And this makes it very difficult for audiences to identify with victims, which is really important, as I said, in human interest, that way of bringing news. So all these aspects, all these problems that I have highlighted, I think need to be addressed in Western media. There needs to be much more attention to these problems. And we need to listen a lot more to the representatives that we've heard today from countries like Nigeria, Pakistan, Egypt, other countries as well, and need to hear from them and be open to listen to them and listen to the way things work there and the dire situation these people are in. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sonja. I really appreciated your perspective as a journalist, and also the topic you brought up about how it affects women and girls who actually escape and get out of the abduction and trafficking and forced marriage situations that they're in. And that's something I would like to circle back on in a few minutes. But first, we are going to take a question from Zoom, and that's a reminder to our viewers via Zoom that you can put a question in the chat, and we will try to see if our panelists have time to answer it. And our first one is for Professor Obokata, asking what can we do to bring more accountability to these governments who are aware of problems in their countries. We talked about Egypt, Pakistan, and Nigeria, where there is evidence of cases of abduction and forced marriage and conversion, and yet they just seem unwilling or unable to help protect their minority women. How can we bring more accountability to these governments?
Sure, I think that's a very good question, and it's also a difficult one that to, how do we hold these, perpetrators and government accountable? But I think that fundamentally there needs to be a change in the societal and cultural acceptance, which is closely interlinked in different areas: cultural life, societal life, and political life as well. And I do believe this has to come from within, like Ms. Mariam was saying, and we need to work closely with the local religious leaders as well as faith-based groups who are in a position to be able to influence the followers, the believers, and so on, to gradually change their mindset about the unacceptability of these practices. And I think that's quite important. Without that, I think we can have this conversation every year and say, okay, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed because there's a still deep-rooted acceptance of these practices. So it does take time, but I think with the role of faith-based groups and leaders, I think that is possible. Then for my part, I certainly would like to work with the government, publicize these issues internationally to put pressure on government to do something about it. And certain governments are more willing to kind of listen than others. I can tell you that. And some governments are quite difficult. But also would like to work with local and religious and leaders of faith-based groups. So in order to raise awareness about the existing international standards, and not necessarily, it's not for me to force them to accept, but I mean just raising awareness and just trying to help them understand these international norms, how they can be incorporated within their own faith-based groups. And I think that, so coming from within, I think would be important. And I certainly would like to offer my service and to you, the panel speakers, as well as others listening today, and so that please do approach me anytime you like. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. I think part of the problem is cultural, it's internal in these countries. So maybe, I know we have lots of activists and human rights advocates in our audience who would maybe encourage cooperating with civil society organizations on the ground in these countries, try to build up internal momentum on the issue. And I appreciate your volunteering to reach out to your office, and that was a follow-up question as well. So how can advocates partner with your office and with your work?
Yeah, of course. I mean, many people, organizations think that we are very remote, kind of somewhere in Geneva, but then certainly there's a contact information and so on. You can contact me at any time. And if there's allegations, for example, of these practices, forced conversion, child and forced marriage, I would like to know about it so that I can communicate directly with the government. So, I would encourage everyone to send us information. And if there's anything I can do, I'll be very happy to appear in workshops and seminars. Nowadays, these can be done virtually. And so please, approach. Feel free to approach me so that I can take part in these events. So that's a promise, and I'll be very happy to do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I do want to circle back to this issue of women and girls who escape from these situations, and maybe even for those that are still in these situations. So I think my question is almost twofold. For those who are trapped in these situations, but maybe they have the internet, where can they turn to help in some of these countries? I know you each have specific areas of expertise. And then as a second part of the question, how can we make sure that the women and girls who escape are protected in the long term after they escape? Yeah, go ahead, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, for us, as part of our activism and advocacy, we're able to set up different channels where reports of cases of violence can actually be done. And apart from that, we also have a channel where we have a signal, like a signal you can use within the communities to, if you need help, probably your perpetrator is standing right next to you and you have a way. So we've been able to train and give some sort of support to a lot of women within the communities we work, actually in the northern part of Nigeria, to be able to channel these reports. And our toll-free lines are also there, and really everyone knows about that. We also work together with some other ministries of governmental ministries and other civil society organizations in which some activities we cannot do ourselves, we refer to other organizations to do it, because funding is always a very huge challenge. So that's why we have to partner with other organizations to see who has funding for this and then be able to channel, and that's another one. So some organizations, like I know UNFPA, is really trying as much as they can to support civil society like organizations like mine, UN Women as well, and also UNICEF within those locations whom I work in partnership with sometimes. That's for the first question. And then for the second question, if you don't mind, can you repeat the question?
Yes, how can we keep these women and girls who've escaped safe?
Yeah, so well, I think that is where our governments in those respective countries comes in, because as an organization, we have a safe house, right? There's difference like a temporary protection program where they stay for a while, they get therapy, psychosocial support and all that. But in the long run, we need the government to come into this and make it more sustainable. Because when you talk about sustainability, like in Nigeria, we do children, we do what they call the reintegration programs, which is headed by the government in Nigeria. And this reintegration program is more ways of bringing wives, all those children that were married off to Boko Haram, bringing them back to the community and ensuring that they accept everything in the specific community, because they actually discriminated against within that community. So the essence of trying to see how they are being reintegrated, actually, for me, it's more 50-50, because there is more sustainability that we need to, like in terms of the poverty alleviation programs, which I mentioned earlier. Most of them don't really have that specific support. At the end of the day, they are abandoned within the communities there, and nothing much, they can't really do much to. I don't want to hog the mic for too long, so I'll let the next person continue.
Thank you. Carolyn, do you have any thoughts?
As far as where they can turn, that's a tough question, because the only place they can turn to is the police and the media. And media sometimes does work in helping bring these girls back. But I remember a few weeks ago getting a call from a cousin of one of the girls women actually, who recently disappeared. And she's a former client, she was an asylee, and she calls and says, she tells me the story of the cousin, and I look it up and I'm like, oh yes, I know this story, it's been all over the media. And she says, well, my problem is that my sister has been blasting the story everywhere and trying to get it attention, and now they're threatening to take my sister. So now she's getting threats. Well, if you don't quit it, you're next. So it's really challenging when the government refuses to provide just even like basic protection or basic assistance, because when victims try to even use social media, sometimes there's backlash and there's threats. So unfortunately, it goes back to government in this kind of situation. And as far as how to keep them safe afterwards, I've noticed just some observation that the community does take them back in and does attempt to help them. So perhaps providing some sort of additional financing or resources from the government to the community, because the community is the one eventually that picks up the healing part, the healing portion, the recovery portion, relocation portion. So perhaps offering resources, financial compensation to the victims' families or to the local community, either through the church, that could be something that on a practical level would help, because the community does, I've noticed, welcome them back in and does help them in whatever way they can.
Yeah, these are great ideas, great recommendations. I'm curious, a lot of you have been activists for a long time in this space. I'm curious how you think we can do a better job raising awareness on these issues. I think a lot of these issues, our individual communities might know about them, but it's hard to break through the ceiling and reach other communities that will just reach a bigger audience. I find that a lot of people are not as aware as I would expect them to be that some of these are issues. It touches on so many things that people care about, human trafficking, religious freedom, forced marriage. These are all huge issues. And then we have these issues where they're all combined, and a lot of people don't know how widespread and how prevalent it is. So how can we be doing a better job to raise awareness?
I think there's something like a raised hands.
Marcela. Okay, we have Marcela, one of our online panelists.
Yes, hello. Yes, I don't know what happened when I was speaking earlier, but I will try to be a little bit sharper. This is a situation that we have detected earlier in Mozambique, that the Islamic State is now killing the women that they have sexually enslaved if they have AIDS. And that if they don't have AIDS, then they sell them as slaves, mostly to the Arabian Peninsula. This is occurring in Mozambique at the border with Tanzania. It is really, really brutal what is happening. And we have been talking about now about people who are taking on the streets, etc., which is the sad normal. But now the cruelty, the level of cruelty is increasing because of the proliferation of the Islamic State all across the entire Africa, Asia, and Central Asia, all the way to the Philippines. So the growth of the problem is just exponential. And aid to the church in need, for example, pays in Pakistan for legal aid to the families of the girls that have been abducted, and the governments just make the process more and more expensive. However, with a problem of the size of the one that we have just learned from Mozambique, of the women already enslaved, having been abducted, turned into sexual slaves, then get AIDS, and then they are killed, or if they, as a reward, if they are not infected, then they are sold as slaves in Saudi Arabia, and nothing happens. You see, I just wanted to have a little bit of perspective on the future. What can we do, and how can we make the Western countries more responsible of the way that they accept these marriages as long as they occurred outside of their territory? You see, there is really an abhorrent, depraved indifference from the West also when the crime is occurring in their own territory. So let's open a discussion about this for a next encounter or something, but please do not forget that this just keeps increasing in size, in cruelty, and the big responsibility of the West in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcela. Yeah, that kind of leads into another question we had, which is what are the most effective government mechanisms, whether that's UN or EU or from Western governments like the United States, to really make a difference on these issues in countries around the world? And I know that's a hard question, but any thoughts from our panelists?
Well, I do believe the multi-stakeholder approach is most important. So I mean, again, I do believe that this has come from within, and the role of international community is to support endeavors by the human, for human rights defenders if they don't have funding. I mean, first and foremost, governments must, this is government's job. It's not your job, and I'm finding quite appalling time and time again that governments are failing to act upon this, and it shouldn't be your burden. Oftentimes you are at the forefront. You filling the protection gap, which I think that needs to change. So that I do believe that government has to do a lot more. And for the international community like myself, I can certainly open up the dialogue with respective governments and try to help them to tackle these issues. But I think Western governments, the United Nations, UN Women, they should be supporting the grassroots human rights defenders, faith-based groups, and local religious leaders so that they can take a leadership in changing the mindset and changing the societal and cultural acceptance. And I think we're here to support that local endeavors. But again, it is better to come from within, like yourselves, raising the voice and protecting. And if there's anything that we can do on my part, but the Western governments is absolutely, I think that's crucial. I mean, they have to, they can't treat this as a kind of someone else's problem, because it is happening in these Western countries, as I said. I mean, the trafficking of male order bride and trafficking women into these countries for forced and child marriage. I mean, that is happening in UK, United States, in Canada, and elsewhere, and rest of Europe. And that has to also be taken into consideration. So there is a need to have that accurate information, like in the media, like there was also raised that the media has a role to play in conveying accurate information, raising awareness among the general public, so that we can play a part in pressuring each government, wherever they are, to do something.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. Reporting is so important, and I think that involves both reporting by government mechanisms, like the United States does an annual trafficking in persons report, and sometimes they touch on these issues as well. So I would love to see these issues incorporated even further into that report, but also reporting by journalists, reporting by even the individuals to whom these incidents are occurring. So I don't know if any of our panelists have thoughts on that, as well as our online panelists are free to answer as well. I know Sonja's on and she might. Go ahead, Sonja.
Yes, well, one of the things that I think is really important when we talk about reporting, but also Western government action, is that we very well know which are the countries that bought Yazidi and Christian women from ISIS. We know which countries they are, and we know the countries in which they were bought and sold. So the transfer countries, transit countries. And it still boggles me why we do not demand that the countries where the men live that bought these women, which is human trafficking, that we demand that these countries legally prosecute these men. Because there have been contracts when the Pope visited Iraq, for example. A lot of these contracts where names of the buyers and everything of the girl, everything was put on paper. ISIS sold women on Facebook. So very often governments know who these men are. And if we are in a coalition of, defeating terrorism, I think getting these women back and getting these men who not only sold them, but also the men that bought them behind bars is a very good place to start.
Absolutely, that's so good. And you brought up the issue of prosecution, and I'll maybe turn to Joseph just to build on that. I know there are so many challenges in prosecuting these cases, and I'd like you to identify some of those challenges and maybe how they can be overcome. Oh, Joseph, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that.
Yes, so actually, if we talk about Pakistan, Pakistan is a signatory on national conventions, but also EU, European countries has really significant roles and role in Pakistan, while allowing Pakistan to free trade to Europe. And Pakistan has this GSP plus status. And I think it's important that international community, particularly UN mechanism and European Union mechanism, to ask firmly Pakistan when it comes to religious freedom or human rights violation in form of forced conversion or child marriage or other, to particularly ask Pakistan to implement, for example, existing laws and submitting a report, asking quarterly or annually reports on religious persecution of Christians or particularly forced conversion that we are talking. So when these mechanism, will be used while putting some conditions or giving them some conditions, if you will not apply complete 27 conventions, next, for example, the trade agreement will not be increased or extended, then there will be people say, where is your money, your heart goes. So Pakistan is enjoying this free trade from last couple of many years, and also it's going to be extended. International communities must ensure and use this tool while asking Pakistan a fair implementation, enforcement of the obligations under GSP plus status. I think that will be quite helpful to making new laws even.
Thank you, Joseph. That's so good, and it's an important reminder that these countries are accountable to the conventions that they sign and even to their word, the values that they say they're upholding. We need to be holding them accountable to that, both at the local level with the type of prosecutions that you do, but also at an international level by individuals like the Special Rapporteur. So I think we are going to ask if any of our panelists have closing remarks, maybe just a final thought from each of you, and then we will end our panel. Caroline, would you like to start? Sorry, no, I might be putting you on the spot here, okay. But any final thoughts?
No, I'm just to wrap up, I mean, I think what the UN Special Rapporteur said was very important regarding starting at home. The countries themselves are responsible for their people, and the burden should shift to them. They should be the ones who are addressing these issues. But like I think it was Sonja mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Western standards, they don't really apply to these countries. So we need to take into consideration the challenges, the limitations, the culture of the countries that we're dealing with when we're analyzing what's happening on the ground in that country. So just because, you know, we'll take Egypt for a moment, you know, the reporting that we have to document what's happening there doesn't measure up to what, you know, the West deems to be, you know, perfect in a, you know, a typical statistical and situation. It doesn't mean that the crime is not happening. So we need to perhaps maybe think more local and focus more on the culture and the country that we're dealing with when we're actually calling out the problem. And when we're interacting with those other countries, when our representatives are interacting with those other countries, they tweak or adjust their approach to what's happening in that country as opposed to US standards. And sometimes these governments are very smart. You know, I can imagine a government saying, well, we don't have any data on this. What data is there on forced conversions? We have no idea what you're talking about. They're smart. They're able to shift the ball back and apply the standards of the West to a country that in no way would ever do that. So I think we need to adjust the way we look at each of these countries and take that into consideration when we're applying that pressure. There's only so much pressure and guilting and shaming we can do. At the end of the day, it comes back to the country. And when we're dealing with them, we should deal with them according to what's going on there, as opposed to the way, you know, we look at things as Americans.
Such good reminders. Mariam, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Caroline. And just to add, I feel like the UN can still do much more. I feel there has to be a push for some of these laws that protect young girls. And I know the UN Special Rapporteur is doing a whole lot already. And I just want to encourage you to do much more, especially when it comes to Nigeria, the northern which, if you notice, most reports are always a bit, they don't have much data about what exactly is happening there. But it's really serious if we do it.
Thank you. I think that your points are all clear and loud, and I very much look forward to working with you. So please do communicate so that I can bring this to the light, the international community, and you know, putting more pressure, or you know, but more importantly, I'd like to work with human rights defenders and those, you know, working in faith-based groups and so on. So hopefully this will be the beginning of a kind of good working relationship. So, you know, if there's anything I can do, please do reach out here, and also those listening online. And we're, you know, very happy to work with, you know, everyone. So please do so. And thank you once again for this opportunity. It was such an important topic in light of that International Day for a Girl Child as well this week. And so I think the reminder that this is an important issue that needs to be dealt with. So thank you for raising this to, you know, bring this event together. I think that was well organized. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And that's such an important aspect of this event and events like this is the relationships that we're building even with each other as we continue to do this work. I'm going to turn to our online panelists for their closing thoughts as well. Let's start with Sonja, if you don't mind.
Yes. Well, thank you. Finally, I would just think all the people online and in your room, Coptic Solidarity, also International Christian Concern, not here, but also they do a tremendous job, the Jubilee campaign, everyone I'm forgetting. I couldn't write my thesis, both of them. I could not have done that without all the information, all the data, all the witness accounts that you have provided over the past years, decades. So thank you. You are really doing very important work.
Thank you. How about Marcela? Any closing thoughts from you?
Yes, thank you very much. I would like just to say that please, we do not have to lose sight of the fact that preventing the birth of children in a particular group, for example, by kidnapping and sexually enslaving their women, is an act of genocide. Please do not forget that. Everybody has is very shocked every time that we use the word genocide. But if you see the UN Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, you will see what is among the acts of genocide that it doesn't have to happen on the same year or quickly, or you don't even have to be dead to be a victim of genocide. But when women are systematically abducted and sexually enslaved by another religious group, or by another community simply to reduce the numbers of that religious community, it is an act of genocide. It's religious manipulation. Our colleague from the Coptic Solidarity mentioned that there are less and less Christians being counted. And we observe that also in Malaysia and in India and in other countries where every child is registered as belonging to the majority religion. Please keep that in mind. It is not just one more crime or 20 crimes into one. It is an act of genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcela. Joseph, any closing thoughts from you?
Yes, I just would like to invite Special Rapporteur to visit Pakistan and with other rapporteurs and have the complete information on the grounds what's going on. That would be highly appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would just like to thank all of our panelists. I've learned so much today. I'm sure all of us learned something. And yeah, you've all been wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to share your stories, your expertise. It's really been wonderful. And I am going to pass it off to Hulda from Jubilee Campaign to close us off and close the event. Thank you to everyone really for coming here, many on short notice, and for sharing about the situation. I think we have a lot we can take with us. And very most make the important that if we have legislators who themselves are the perpetrators, it's very difficult to see a change so that is something that also needs to be addressed. And then also really appreciate the Special Rapporteur for being here. So on behalf of Jubilee Campaign, Anne is not able to take the floor, but I really sincere thanks. And thank you to all the advocates for the work that you're doing. Joseph, I know that, the really concerning is like what you said, the soft genocide, because even when the girl is returned to her family, they've shared that they have asked the girl to still be practicing the religion they forced upon her even after the fact. And then in other countries, like even the Yazidi women and Assyrian women, their children cannot be recognized as their as Yazidi or Christian. Even they're registered as Muslim, even if they are victims of genocide. So very important point. So we just wanted to say thank you again to all of you and for your time. And I think we have to move forward with this issue.